Thank you. I can't see any of you, but I'm sure you're out there somewhere.
It's the best thing. You'll hear a pin drop, but you can't see them, and that's good. Over the years that I've been interviewing people on Sundays at 7, it's not often that I read a story as disturbing as yours during the early years. And yet, you are a living example of how God can transform lives. So, if I may, I'd like in this first part of tonight's interview to recall with you exactly the events that took place in your life, particularly up to the age of about 26, if I may. You were born in Salford, the son of 2 alcoholic parents, and you lived on some pretty rough estates. Just describe to me what that was like and the effect it had on you, with things like verbal and physical abuse.
Well, when I look back, my father was unashamedly my hero. I mean, in his prime, he was about 6'3", an enormous character, born in Toxteth, Liverpool. And my mum was about 5 foot, just 5 foot, born in Birkenhead. And like you said, both alcoholics, both atheists, and just really fiery. But, you know, you get what you get when you're born. So I got those two. No brothers and sisters. I've got stepbrothers and sisters that I haven't really seen. But growing up with those two, like I said, my dad was my hero. But it was just hard work. My father was obviously a heavy drinker. He was a womanizer, various affairs that I remember even as a kid. And one of the things I remember is growing up with adults. So I didn't have any sort of friends of my own age, because if anyone's experienced growing up in that sort of environment, it was all, where I was in Manchester, it was working man's clubs, it was pubs, it was different events, and it was all adult. And then when I'd come home, there'd always be sort of parties or drinking events going on. So I just grew up in that environment. And my mother and father were so verbally violent to each other. It was just extraordinary, the amount of attack that they could verbalize towards each other, looking back at it now. And as a kid, I was caught in the crossfire, and that does have an effect.
How young were you when you had the first memories of this?
I think around about 8 or 9, a few things happened to me. A few things. One of them was, like I said, my father was my hero, and where we lived in Gorton in Manchester, there was a big park. And my dad taught me to ride a bike in there, which was a good fun bit. And then he used to play this game with me where he would, it was a game of sort of chance and dare, really. He'd sit me on a wall, and he'd get me to jump into his arms, and then he'd catch me. And it was brilliant. But my dad, being my dad, had to push it a little bit. So then he'd get me to sort of squat on the wall, and I'd dive into his arms. And every time he'd move further and further away. So we got to the point where I was standing on the wall, and it was really exciting as a kid because my dad was there. And then he'd get me to dive and leap, and he'd catch me, and it was brilliant. One day when we got to the point of standing and diving, as I dived for him, he moved. And I fell, obviously. I grazed my hands and my knees, and we walked back home in silence. It's my dad. When we got home, my mum wasn't silent, that's for sure. I got cleaned up and sent to bed. And I remember the argument now, still in my ears, that my mother went ballistic with him, saying, well, I won't repeat what she said, but she kind of said, what on earth were you doing, Arthur? Why did you do that to Paul? And I remember my dad's words. He said, I did that because I wanted to teach Paul a lesson. I wanted to teach him that he should never trust anybody, because they will always let him down and they will always move away from him. Because that was my father's experience of life, which was worse than mine. So that had an effect on me about trust and
Sure.
people.
Yeah. Was there any stabilizing influence in your life at all in those early years?
Alsatians, dogs. My father had various business which mostly failed, or I don't know what happened to them really, but one of the things he did, he had a guard dog business. He would hire men and train them into security, and they'd be security officers, and he had Alsatians. So I grew up with Alsatians. The earliest picture of me that I can remember, I must be about 15, 16 months old. There's an Alsatian sat next to me with the heads bigger than mine. So I always had these dogs around me, and it sounds weird saying it to you, but they became my friends, actually, the Alsatians, Ludo, different dogs that we had. They were my comfort. And hero magazines, you know, Captain Marvel and all those sort of things, and really, that's it.
Clearly, school didn't work out because you were expelled at 15. What happened in school?
Well, because we moved around a lot, because of my parents, they were in debt a lot, or my father was, and we had to move to various places, and we lived in some rough areas in Salford and Gorton, and Didsbury, Stockport, all those different. So we're constantly moving. And at one school I was in, we did what was called the 11 plus, if people remember that now, and seemingly I did quite well at it, surprisingly. And then I was meant to go to a grammar school, Manchester Grammar, which I was really excited about. I even went to look at it because it had fields around it and different things, and it was exciting. But then we moved again, and I wasn't allowed to go to the grammar school. I had to go to a comprehensive school in a place called Denton in Manchester. And it was, goodness me, it was a rough school. And I was a small, blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, and I was bullied. And if anyone in here has been bullied, you know what that's like. There was fights in the corridor when the bell would go to change classes. There was fights at the gate. I hated it, and I was hopeless. I wasn't a fighter. My father was, but they never taught me those skills. So I just didn't go. So in the end, I was expelled for truancy, really. Constantly, I thought I was a bit thick. That's why I was expelled. But it was through fear that I was expelled.
Things came to a head at home, didn't they? And you were thrown out of the house at the age of 16 to live on the streets. Why was that? How did that come to a head?
Well, we had this sort of pattern, this cycle of life when I was growing up in our house with my mum and dad, is that, he would start an argument basically on a Thursday, and then he'd slam the door and go to the pub. Friday, they'd go out together. Saturday, we'd be at some working man's club or something. Sunday, he'd be out, we'd come back, my mother would cook a meal. Monday, they'd be good together. Tuesday was quite nice, they were fun. Wednesday, it would start again. So one Sunday, my father came home quite drunk and started laying into my mother verbally. My mother had just cooked a Sunday roast. She was really angry that he was drunk. Anyway, a big fight started between them verbally. And my father went to backhand my mother to hit her, and I got in the gap. First time I'd done that, I thought, I don't want my mother hit. And the backhand that she was going to get, I got, which knocked me over. And then another argument started, and my father basically said, I want you out. So in my arrogance and youth, I ran upstairs, I got a bag, I threw some stuff in it, and I ran out the door, a place called Didsbury, and I slammed it behind me. And I got about 10 meters out, and I thought, I have no idea where I'm going. I have no friends to go to or anything. I've got no money. But I remember thinking, it's got to be better out there than it is in there, because it was just a war zone, which, even at that age, I just thought, I just can't. At one point there was an argument, and I ended up banging my head on a wall. I remember that, for the noise to stop, for the verbal stuff to stop. So I ended up on the streets. Not for a while, but I was on the streets in Manchester, then got picked up by a gang, really, actually. Someone who was really dysfunctional gave me a cup of tea and said, "Do you want some help, son?" And I moved into a squat in Stockport, in that house, with lots of interesting people coming and going all the time. But weirdly enough, they started to look after me.
The downward spiral continued, and you ended up in prison at 17. What was that for, and what sort of things did you get involved in?
Well, when I moved into that squat, I had a bit of it was a squat, so you can imagine what that was like. There was all sorts of stuff going on. And that's when I got involved in crime, petty theft. I was never a massive sort of career criminal. I was hopeless at it. I constantly got caught. I was the one with the leg hanging through the window that the copper always grabbed hold of. It was constantly me. But in that house, we did that. We used to go out and steal things which I'm not proud of from shops, and then it was factories, and it was warehouses, and then it was scooters and cars and bits and pieces. And we'd bring the stuff back, and what we do is sort of pool all that stuff in there. Somebody would come in, take it away, some money would come back. And that's how I earned a living. But I wasn't good at it, so constantly in trouble with the police, bound over to keep the peace, fined, probation, which I never went to. I couldn't pay the fines because I was unemployed, and eventually I ended up in front of a magistrate's in Manchester. And I remember, and I said this morning, that the magistrate looked at me and said, "Cowley, you are not listening to what we're trying to do. You, my son, are going to prison to teach you a lesson." And I went downstairs into the van, and I got sent to Risley, which is not far from here, actually, in between Liverpool and Manchester. And then it was a Borstal detention centre with a nickname of Grizzly Risley. And it was, I don't have to tell you what that was like. It made my house look quite nice, to be honest.
At 21, you enlisted in the army. Between the ages of 21 and 26, you had 2 marriages, 2 divorces. You left your first wife with a 3-year-old child, and you described yourself as a violent, crude, drinking, and womanizing man. What was going on then in that period?
Do you know what? I became my father. Actually, that's what I turned into. The army saved my life. I had a real break because of the criminal record. They weren't going to accept me, but I was so persistent. I went back to the recruiting office in Manchester for every week for 6 months. I was a real pain in the butt to them. And in the end, after 6 months, they sat me down and said, "We've been watching you. You're quite determined, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, I can be if I want to be." And that was the 27th of January 1976 that I was enlisted into the army. And goodness me, I just couldn't believe someone had taken a risk on me. Someone saw something in me, this officer. And I spent the next 17 years in the military, 2 tours of Northern Ireland, the Falklands, 5 different regiments, transferred into the Army Physical Training Corps. I had a really good career. Promotion on posting to staff sergeant. So that side of my life was brilliant. The army really, it fed me, it watered me, it gave me self-discipline, and it taught me loads of skills. I got quite fit. I didn't realize I had all that stuff inside me. But what it didn't teach me or give me was any moral compass. The only moral compass I had was my background, which was my mother and father. So marriages and divorces, and I just couldn't handle the responsibility. I got married in Stockport, posted to Germany. Wasn't going really well, didn't know how to be a husband, didn't know what that looked like really. My mother was my father. Thought I'd have a child, or we'd have a child that will fix it all, bring it all together. That didn't work. And when Clinton was 3, I realized I just can't, I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know how to do that stuff, and I don't know how to be a husband. So, I did what I always did then. I just got rid of the problem. So I sent them both back to the UK, and I continued with my military career. Liked being on my own for a while, and then I didn't. I got married again. Posted back here to Chester, actually. I got divorced, married and divorced in Chester. And then 18 months, 20 months really later, another divorce, and that was my plan. That was me. My life really was full of debt. It was full of divorce, it was full of drink, and when I look back, it was full of despair, but you wouldn't see that from the outside. I mean, I was a good soldier, but inside, just a wreck, but I would never I would never go near that with anybody.
If you were to look back, I mean, it was 17 years in the army, and you had to put in one sentence, what did those 17 years in the army do for you?
Well, it sounds cliched now, but it made a man of me. But it depends on what type of man comes out. But it made a man of me. I was certainly never bullied again. When I went through the gates of Woolwich Arsenal, I joined the artillery. I remember walking through the gates saying, "That's it, no one lays a hand on me anymore." So I learned how to look after myself, and depending on your character, I ended up a bully in a uniform, so I could handle myself, and I wouldn't let anyone lay a hand on me again. So it taught me a lot of skills and did shape me, I think, into the character I am now, but not the moral character I am now. That was a bit that was lacking. And the part that the army's supposed to do that is about chaplaincy. You know, the chaplains, the God people are meant to search you out and look out for you, but I never met any.
Now, this next bit I find a bit surprising, to say the least. You became the general manager of the Bath and Rackets Club in Mayfair and then Champneys Health Club in Piccadilly. How did you manage that?
Why is that surprising? How did I manage that? Oh, dear. Well, I left the army after, like I said, 17 years. I was posted somewhere I didn't want to go, so I left. They were going to send me to the Guards Regiment in Purbright, and I thought that's not going to go well. So I resigned out of there, came out. And then I was bumming around a little bit. My last 4 years were Army physical training course, so I was qualified up to the neck in physical training, so I became a personal trainer. I got some clients in London. My girlfriend, wife now, worked for a TV company in London, so I got involved. I was just wheeling and dealing and making some money. And then I went to see a friend of mine in the military. And as I was chatting to him, a signal, it's called a signal, it's a letter came through that they were looking for someone to run a squash club in London. And my friend who was in the army said, you play squash, don't you? I said, yeah, a little bit. He said, well, here, take this then. So I inquired about the job, and the whole thing was wrong. It had come through Hereford. 22 SAS were looking for somebody. Anyway, the whole signal was completely wrong. And what it was running a health club in Mayfair for a guy called Mark Burley, who was a multi-millionaire, who ran Annabelle's, Harry's Bar, Mark's Club, and had this private men's health club. And he took a liking to me, and I don't know why, but he hired me. And I was there for about 4 or 5 years, and then got headhunted from there to run Champneys and become the general manager of theirs in Piccadilly. They're great jobs, brilliant jobs.
Absolutely. So that's the background sorted out. And in the second part, I want to talk to you about how God changes lives, and particularly yours. But before we have another song from Anna, and I'd like her to come out with Pete now and get herself ready. Can you sum up your life? I mean, you know, you've not rocked us with all of that. If I had to say to you, sum up the whole thing up to that point, what would you say?
Up to that point?
Yeah.
A nightmare. It was just, I don't know if anyone's boxed in here, but you know, in boxing, if your opponent is stronger than you, your seconds in the corner will what's called throw the towel in. And I so wanted to throw the towel in on my life so many times because I was just fed up, cheesed off. It was like being on the treadmill of just trying to survive, to do one deal, to do another deal, to keep going from one marriage to a divorce, to a marriage, to a divorce, to the guilt and the consequences of my son, to earning some money, then just a treadmill that I wanted to get off, but I had no idea how to get off it. And actually, I wanted my seconds, that analogy, to throw the towel in and say, do you know what? He gives up. But I just didn't know how to do that stuff at all.
We're going to talk some more about changed lives, what God can do in the second part. But in the meantime, we're going to have another song from Anna, supported by Pete. In 1994, after being an atheist for almost 38 years, you attended an Alpha course and volunteered for a prison visit. What prompted you to go on an Alpha course?
Again, it's a long story, but just to paraphrase it, a few things started happening in my life. I mean, I know I can say I was a non-believer, but I was a non-believer. You can guess by my lifestyle. I didn't even know. I'd lived in Chester for 4 years, and I didn't even know there was a cathedral. That's how uninterested I was. I was quite surprised where it was this morning when I saw it. And I've been up and down that street, so just not interested in this stuff at all. And then a few things happened. One was a couple of people that were important to me. My mother, who I hadn't seen for years, long story short, became a Christian. And when I got to see her, she basically died of cancer. And I found out she was a Christian afterwards. I found a Bible when I was putting all this stuff in bin bags to give it to Oxfam, because there was only me left to clear it out. And I found this Bible, and in the Bible was it was all highlighted and stuff. And then there was some photos of me in it, which really upset me as a kid. And at the back there was a Manchester number, and it was a code that I recognised. So I phoned it, and I said, "Oh, it's awful when I think about it." I said, "Who are you? How do you know my mother? And what are you doing in the back of this Bible?" And she said, "Oh, I know your mother, Brenda. She goes to the same church." I said, No, my mother doesn't do church." "Oh, yeah, no, your mum became a Christian two years ago, and that Bible you've got is what we gave her when she was baptized." I said, "What?" I said, "Anyway, she's dead." And I hung up. And I thought, my mother, a Christian? I mean, she could start an argument in an empty room, my mother, and probably win. So she was just... So that happened. I thought, what's going on there? And then a friend of mine in the army, who was a senior instructor over me when I transferred into the PT Corps, a lunatic, just a psychopath in uniform. I mean, I hated him. And when I left the army, he was still in. Anyway, something happened to him in Hong Kong. He had a God incident. And he wrote to me. And again, long story short, I went to see him in Aldershot. I'm a civvy now. So I thought, he's got no power over me. And he talked to me for 3 days about God. And anyway, I left him, and I thought, what is happening to these people around me who were so not Christian people? Let's put it that way. And then a few other things happened, and someone invited me on an Alpha course, and I thought, what's that? And I went to see it. I went with Amanda, my girlfriend, and what I liked about it was someone gave me a piece of paper, and I looked at it, and it was very structured. It was done over 15 sessions, 10 weeks. It was an hour and a half. It was free food, and I thought, I quite like structure. 17 years in the army, I've done every course you can possibly think of, from jumping out of airplanes to a sniper to a tank driver. I thought, I'll do a course on God, and then I'll get it out of the way and I'll move on. And it was halfway through that course that I guess I had a moment. I remember thinking, they'd just done, the speaker had done the talk on the Holy Spirit. Now, I didn't know what the Holy Spirit was, or anything really. And he started talking, and something happened inside of me. And I think now, I just listened to those words that were really moving. God sort of hunted me down. And I think it was God that... I remember sitting on my own thinking, I don't know what I'm doing with this stuff. What is going on in my life? And I think it was God took the towel. Took the towel and threw it in the ring and said, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop? Why don't you give me a chance? Why don't you listen to me? Let me help you, Paul, with your life. The next part of your life I can really help you with, and I've got some great plans. Plan to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope in the future. But you've got to trust me. You've got to let go of this stuff. And I think the analogy breaks down, but I think he took the towel off me and just threw it and said, come on. And that was the moment. That
was the defining moment.
That was just a moment where, then someone just drew alongside me and put their arm on my shoulder, which I was a bit defensive. And he said, are you all right? And I was crying at the time. And I said, yeah, I'm all right. He said, shall we pray? And I think it's then something inside me said, yeah. And we prayed. And from that moment, really, not overnight, no lightning in the sky or writing on the wall or anything. It's been an issue. It's been a struggle. But my life started to change. God promises, I think it's in Isaiah 53, he says, if you come to me, really, I'll give you a life that is like a well-watered garden. And I thought, that is the nicest scene I can think of, a well-watered garden. Because my life was more like a desert. It was full of boulders and rocks, and it was arid, and it was dry, and it was a struggle, and it was parched, and I was just fed up of it. So the well-watered garden, I thought, I'll have a bit of that. That sounds really nice.
So following the Alpha course and that defining moment and a time of change, you wrote to me and said that one of your most urgent priorities was to make peace with your 2 ex-wives and to try and form a good relationship with your son. How did you achieve that?
Well, it takes time, and they're easy words to read out, but they're not easy to do. That's for sure. And I felt God prompt me all the way through. You know, the timeline's a bit different, but the 2 women that I married were good women. You know, it was me that was the nightmare. It wasn't them. I caused chaos in their lives and then dumped them, basically. And when I became a Christian, I did want to make amends. And I wrote to both of them. Amanda helped me write the letters to both of them, you know, and saying, I'm sorry. You know, I can't make it any better than it was. I apologize for my behavior. I've realized, you know, what I put you through, and it was very cathartic. And you know, I had a reply back from my first wife, Lynn, who was my son's mother, saying, "Thank you. I knew what I was getting into when I married you, Paul. I married a soldier," and that was, goodness me, that was real forgiveness, I think, on both sides. I was just trying to make amends, but she forgave me, really, which was massive. And my other wife, Jill, I did the same thing, really. I wrote an email and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I put you through. And Clinton, you know, I hid Clinton from Amanda for a long time. I lied completely because I thought if I tell her, when I met Amanda, I thought if I tell her what type of man I am, she won't love me. And I didn't aim to fall in love with her. I met Amanda in Cyprus when I was in the army. She was on an art college from London to Cyprus, and I was training some men on a mountain there. Anyway, we met. And I fell in love with her, but I didn't want to fall in love with anyone because I know what I'm like. And I did, and we met again when I was posted back to UK, and I just lied for a long time. I hid my past, and that was, if you can imagine what a strain that is. She thought I was single. Her mum kind of knew something was going on, but I said I was single, never been married, no kids or anything like that, and I lied. And eventually, I couldn't hold the guilt or bear the responsibility or the burden of that stuff, and I told her, and it was really distressing for her, as you can imagine, and for me, because I thought she'd leave me. Yeah. But she is an I hope she's in here somewhere. She is an extraordinary woman that God sent me. So I got my relationship back with my son. I got to see him again when he was 16. He'd got in trouble with the police. Lynn, his mum, had phoned Amanda up at work. Amanda had phoned me. I'd spoken to Lynn, and she said, "You've got to step in here, Paul. Really, he's involved in a lot of stuff he shouldn't be involved in, and you need to help." And I met him at King's Cross Station, and he moved in with us, and he's basically been with us ever since. Really,
he moved in with you and Amanda.
He moved in, me and Amanda, because we'd lived together. I became a Christian. I became like Billy Graham overnight. I thought, we've got to stop all this stuff. No more sex stuff. None of that. No sleeping together. Get it all, got to get it right with God. And then we got married. And then Clinton just, God just knows the plan. So I was already settled with Amanda. We had a home. And then Clint turns up. And then I could invite him into my home. So he lived with us. And then eventually got his own place. And he's 40 now, 41. And we speak every day. And he's a Christian. And he's an amazing young man, actually.
That is such... You 3 lots of forgiveness, Clinton and your 2 wives. You saw the need to try and put that right.
Well, forgiveness is easy to say, but it's hard to do. With Clinton, he sat with us one night between me and Amanda on the settee in our house. And the conversation turned to stuff that, I was awful to him, just an absent dad. And when I was there, I wasn't brilliant. I tried to be, but I just couldn't. So I asked him for forgiveness, it was a really emotional night. I started to sob, and he hugged me and said, "Dad, it's all right, I forgive you, and you forgive." And it was, and that he gave his life to Christ there, really, between us, and I said, "I can't fix this. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, but I can only tell you who helped fix me, Jesus." And we prayed together, and he committed his life, and he's been a Christian ever since. But they're not easy things to do. I'm not saying them flippantly, but they're the most transforming parts of my life, really.
To follow on with what you just said, you're now married to an amazing lady, Amanda, for over 20 years. And you have an equally amazing grown-up daughter.
I do.
Your wife must be a very special lady. Tell me about Amanda.
Amanda is an extraordinary mixture of, she's an artist, she's a writer, she is extraordinary. I've not been asked this before, so she's just a woman of grace. I can't... I'm not quite sure how she's been able to put up with me over the years.
She loves you.
Yeah, she loves me, yeah, she does. So she's an extraordinary mother. She's an extraordinary wife, very gifted. And she's a rock to me, actually. I met her on a rock, funny enough. I met her on a rock in Cyprus. And we took our daughter back to show her the rock. Phoebe wasn't that interested in the rock. I said, "This is the rock." She goes, "Daddy, it's a rock." That was it.
Paul, the tears in your eyes say more than your words. And wait until you hear this. In 1996, Paul pioneered the Alpha course in prisons. In 2002, completed a degree in theology and was ordained in the Church of England. In 2005, you founded the charity Caring for Ex-Offenders. In 2012, you founded the William Wilberforce Trust. In 2014, you received the Lifetime Achievement Award for your work in prisons. And in 2016, you were awarded the MBE by the Queen for services to ex-offenders. And you were also appointed Bishop's Advisor for Prisons and Penal Affairs in London. If that doesn't deserve a round of applause, I don't know what does.
Thank you.
How do you believe God was able to turn you from all that you were before to all that you are now?
I think God is always looking, he's always looking at our heart. If you look at the character King David in the Bible, who was an interesting bloke, let's put it that way, some of the things that he got up to, just a rebel, just everything that he did against what God would want him to do most of the time. And at the end, in the Bible, the epitaph for King David, God said, really, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, he was a man after my own heart. So God looks at the heart, I think. He doesn't look at this stuff. He looks at the heart of what you've done or what you were. He looks at what you can be or could be with him. And I think with me, I got invited on a prison trip, which I did not want to go on. I was suited and booted running Champneys. I had my Cherokee Jeep. My girlfriend was working for a TV company. And, we ate out. It was all fine. I was on a nice little package. And she said, "Do you want this woman from church, who are very persistent?" She said, "Do you want to come on a prison visit?" I said, "No, I do not want to go on a prison trip. I've been trying to stay out of it most of my life." But you know what the people, these Christians are like. She just, I'll tell you a quick story. I ran Champneys, which is a big fancy club. And I had a diary secretary and I had a PA. And my PA said to me, "That woman from church is on the phone again to speak to you." I said, "Can you just tell her I'm not here? I'm a Christian now, but I'm still lying." And she says, "Okay." So the next day, I said, "Look, can you just tell her I'm out of the country or something or whatever, get rid of her?" Okay. PA comes in again. She says, I said, "Look, I've told you what to say to her." She said, "I would, Paul, but she's outside." She'd come to the club to see me. And the reason I tell you that story is I thought, I'll give her breakfast and a cup of tea and then I'll get rid of her. 2.5 hours later, when I was seeing her off the premises, and she said to me basically, do you know what, Paul, you're all suited and booted and you've got a very good job and everything, but it's not what God wants for you. And I said, well, I think he does, it's fine. He said, no, God's got another plan for you, and you should come on a prison visit with me. And to shut her up, I went on a prison visit down to Dartmoor. And it was there that she pushed me and persuaded me to do stuff with the men in the prison. And when I got in the car park going home, I thought, goodness me, I just wonder if these men could benefit from the course that I went on. I wonder if they could have this sort of simple relationship with God that could change their lives. And just think if those in prison that have got worse backgrounds than me could come to... And the plan started in my head. And that's where Alpha for Prisons... I didn't start Alpha, but me and Emmy Wilson started it within the prison system. And then it was just a snowball from there, really. I can be a bit persistent.
I know how passionate you are over prison work and your prison work. Just briefly share with me one or two of the figures that you were giving this morning. It might shock people here about offending, reoffending, and after an Alpha course.
Well, we've got approximately 90,000 people in the prison system in the UK. 4,000 of that 90,000 are females in detention centres. The reoffending rates for a year or 2 years can be as high as 79%, so that's 8 out of 10 people will be back in prison in 2 years. For less than 12 months, it's just like a turnstile going back into prison and that. So the reoffending rates are horrendous. They can cost the taxpayer anything from 9 to 13 billion pounds a year. That's what reoffending costs us as a country. And what we've been finding, Alpha now is in 75% of the prisons in the UK. We had a chaplain there this morning talking about it. So it's probably one of the biggest courses in the UK prison system. It's also in 75 countries around the world, and I was trying to work out probably near enough 1 million people have been introduced to Christ in the prison system through it, which is extraordinary. But what we found, the combination of someone coming to Christ doesn't have to be Alpha. It could be prison fellowship or Bible study or whatever it is, or just God speaking to them. The combination of them finding faith, then being met on the outside of the wall by various charities. The one that I started was called Caring for Ex-Offenders, where that's a church-based organisation, or volunteers will meet the person at the prison gate, help them with accommodation, bring them into the church, settle them in, and do all that stuff properly and help. The reoffending rates nationally are as low as 22%. And in our own church, which I can speak hand on heart, we've had 84 ex-offenders through 5 sites. The reoffending rate there is less than 15%. So what I was saying this morning is the statistics are pointing to more God, less crime. So the more you can introduce people to a living faith, and for me it would be a Christian faith, the less chance of them reoffending and committing crime really diminishes with a supportive church.
Yeah. On the same subject, really, we've seen a big increase in knife crime and drug-related offences. And now there's talk of an extra 20,000 police officers. What is going on in society today? And more importantly, for people like you, what should we be praying for?
There's so many things I could say, but one of the things that keeps coming to my mind, and I was at a conference with Amanda the other day, is the church. The church has to be at the epicenter of this work, not on the peripheral edges. I mean, at the heart of it. It's our corporal acts of mercy, which are Matthew 25, verse 35. I was hungry, I was sick, I was naked, I was lonely, I was a stranger, I was in prison, and you came to visit me. As a Christian, they're not a, pick any one of 10. They're a command. So they're what we're supposed to do. And I think it's in the scriptures where God gets really personal, and he says, I was in prison, I was sick, I was lonely, I was naked, and you came to see me. If you do this for the least of them, you do it for me. It's really personal in the scriptures. And I think if the church, and lots of churches are, but if they can start to engage, if every church took one person that was committing their life to Christ in prison, and I can assure you there's thousands of them doing it all the time. If just every church took one person, we could empty the prisons. Of over 50%, rough average, over 50% of people in prison commit to being a Christian. 50% of 90,000, 45,000. There's more churches than that. If every one of them was met at the gate, it's not going to work for everyone. Obviously, I'm not that naive. But the church needs to get up and get engaged in this work and take these men and women who have given their life to Christ, who want to change and don't know how to do it. And we have the skills to do that. Absolutely have the skills to do that.
I have a final question to you, but it's not so much a question, it's more an opportunity for you to compare something. You'll know right away what I'm talking about. I want to ask you, would you put your hand up if you've ever read the book, seen the film, or been to the musical Les Miserables?
Oh, look at that.
An awful lot of you. In which case, you'll know the story. To complete tonight's interview, Paul, briefly, why am I saying that?
It's because I'm a bit of a bore on that film. I love that film. I didn't know anything about it. Amanda, again, one of the things she did when I met her was sort of introduce me to the classics, to reading, to books, to film, to literature, to everything. And I just swallowed it up. And I saw that film, and as you know, it's written by Victor Hugo. It was him trying to get the French people back to God during the French Revolution. They'd given up the miserables, the poor people, the miserable ones, and he was trying to bring God into it through the novel. And when I saw it, I am a bore. I've even read the book, which I was very proud of. It took me 6 months to read it. And saw the film, and the reason you're saying it is there's a part in it where one of the main characters, a man called Valjean, Jean Valjean, and he was a good man, really, and the story goes that he stole some bread for his sister, whose children were starving, so he nicked a loaf. He got caught. He got sent to 3 years, and then they tried to escape, and he got more. I don't know what he did in the end, 17, 19 years hard labor. And that sentence turned this man from a good man, actually, into a hardened, violent, character, and that's how he was released. And he goes around, as you know the story, goes around, he's released, nobody wants him, the kids are throwing stones at him, people are poking him in the villages, and he's moved on, and anyway, he falls in one village and hides in a doorway, and it's snowing and it's freezing, and he's waiting to be moved on, and he's not, he sleeps on the doorstep. And in the morning, they open the door, and the two maids, he's sleeping in the bishop's doorway. It's the bishop's vicarage of the church, but he didn't know that. And he's sleeping there, and they're about to shoo him off. And this bishop, who for me just is the epitome of love, and that song that we just had, that God hunts us down. And the bishop says, no, bring him in. So the two maids are a bit nervous. They bring this man in, and they wash him, and they clean him, and they sit him in front of the fire, and they give him soup and bread, and then he has a meal, and then they put him to bed, and he's got clean sheets and a pillow, and he lies there, if you know the scene, and he's looking up at the wall, and there's a cross on the wall, and he just can't bear it. It's called unconditional love, and we would call it grace. And he can't bear it, and he gets up in the middle of the night, he grabs a sack, and he nicks all the silver, grabs the spoons, the forks, the knives, anything, the plates, puts it all in there, puts it over his shoulder, and runs. And he gets caught. The next morning, the police, the gendarmerie, bring him in and throw him on the floor in front of the bishop, and say, "My Lord Bishop, this man has stolen from you, and we found him outside the village, and he's going to go back to prison, and we brought him." And there's this moment where the bishop says, no, he's my friend. I gave him all the silver. In fact, Valjean, you forgot the most two important bits. And he goes to the altar, and he gets these massive 2 big silver candelabras and gives them to Valjean. And the police, he says, take the shackles off him. He dismisses the police. And Valjean is just on the floor by now crying. And the bishop picks him up and he says, "My son," and puts his hand on his chest and he says, "Today I have prayed that no more darkness shall enter your soul, and from now on you will do good." And if you know the story, he goes off, he takes the silver, he sells it, he buys a factory, he employs all the women that are caught in prostitution and being beaten, and he becomes the mayor of the city, and he just becomes a good man. It's extraordinary what he does, how he's restored. That's why I was saying second chances and grace and unconditional love are what will get you every time.
Paul, it's been a delight and a pleasure, hasn't it? To listen to you, to listen to your story, but more importantly, what God has done in your life. We've needed that as a church. We've needed to listen to you, and you've given us an awful lot. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Cowley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.